Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Discos Memorables, Memorable Records, a special edition in English today. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez and I'm talking to you from the northwest of the great state of Tennessee in the USA. And today we're going to have a very special show, not simply because it's in English, which we've done more episodes in English on this series of Memorable Records, but because we're going to change the format a little bit as well. We're not going to be talking only about one specific record, but we're going to be talking about different songs, choice songs, as it were, about from the career of a jazz singer that we don't usually talk about very much. In fact, I don't think that I have ever written about this jazz singer in my Jazz Flashes website, and I think I need to change that because I have several of her records. And it's a very interesting singer. Another thing that I would say is, for example, some of the great jazz critics like Will Friedwald did not mention this singer in books like Jazz Singing or the biographical guide to the greatest jazz and pop singers. But she deserves attention, and we're going to give her some attention today with our special guest joining us from the beautiful and really cold city of Stockholm, Sweden. I'm talking about Guy Jones. Hello, Guy. How are you doing this afternoon over there?
I'm fine, thank you, Anton. And how are you doing? Well, it's before lunchtime, isn't it, in Martin, Tennessee?
It's actually pretty early in the morning, around 9 a.m., and here I am in my office at the university, again, and ready to talk about Stacey Kent. And Stacey Kent is the singer that you have chosen for this special edition of Memorable Records. We're going to be talking about 8 different songs that you have chosen from her whole 20-year career.
Yeah.
And the first question, Guy, is why Stacey Kent? Why, among all the different singers, have you decided to talk about this particular one?
Yes, okay, that's right. Stacey Kent. Why Stacey Kent? Well, Stacey Kent has been on my mind, if I can just be pompous about it, since around the midsummer, because we, as a family, normally go to Spain for our holidays. And this year, when we went in early July 2017, we were close to a little dusty town called San Xavier, down near, well, it's about an hour south of Alicante. And every year they have a jazz festival, a rather good one, which they hold in a little, well, not that little, probably seats around, I don't know, 1,500 or 2,000 people, amphitheatre in this sort of dusty seaside town, if you can have a dusty seaside town. And they have some very good artists on an annual basis, extremely good actually, I hadn't really realised. And this year, luckily enough, Stacey Kent turned up with her quartet. And it's never having, I've liked Stacey Kent for a long, long time, but never having had the chance to see her, I felt that I rather won the lottery, actually, when she turned up in San Xavier in the summer. So I was able to go and see her on a Saturday night in a very warm Spanish provincial amphitheatre, where, fortunately, you could smoke, actually. Only in Spain are you allowed to do this. I love it. I love it. So, and on with Stacey that night, where it was a double bill. And the first act was the Swiss pianist Thierry Lang, whom I'd also never seen, but liked enormously, actually. And we must look into him more at a later date, Anton. But he was with he was basically a trio plus a harmonica player called Olivier Urio. I'm not quite sure how to say that. Who's from the French island of Réunion in the Indian Ocean, which is, you know, how many jazzers have you met from Réunion? Not very many, I suspect. And together with a bass player, Heiri Kenzig, and Mario Gonzi on drums, Thierry treated us to about, I don't know, eight, well, what was it? I think it was about 6 standards, all beautifully melodically played, and a couple of originals, which were equally good. And that was another eye-opener for me. But the prime attraction of that evening was Stacey Kent and her band. And since then, Stacey Kent has released a new orchestral record. It's her first orchestral record in a 20-year recording career. And she's also coming to play at a small jazz club in Stockholm in May, for which I've already bought my tickets. I think I've never bought a ticket so early in advance for a gig before. So I'm very much looking forward to that. So, and there's a third or fourth reason why I picked Stacey Kent as well, because last year, as you're aware, Anton, I set up this little digital reissues label, primarily to reissue the forgotten or lost recordings, or rather unavailable recordings, of the Swedish pianist Jan Lundgren, whom I've known for a long time. And our first issue was a record called Jan Lundgren Trio Plays the Music of Victor Young. And there are three. It's a record he made with the trio and the late Johnny Griffin and Deborah Brown, a fabulous singer from Kansas City. I think this is the Missouri, Kansas City, rather than Kansas City. And Stacey Kent features on 3 tracks on that album. So that's why she's been on my mind, basically.
Well, there's several reasons, and several good reasons too. She's had a fairly long career at this point. She was born in 1965 in New Jersey, and she's been New York-based for quite a while. But she actually became interested in singing jazz while in your part of the world. Actually, it was, I believe, while she was in England that she.
Yes, that's right. I mean, she went to somewhere called Sarah Lawrence College. I don't know where that is, somewhere in the US. But she came to England after she graduated from Sarah Lawrence, and she studied music at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London, which is a very famous school. And that's where she met Jim Tomlinson, the saxophonist, to whom she's actually married, and got married to in 1991. So some 6 years before her recording career took off, because she didn't make the first record until it was recorded in '96, and I think it was released in '97. So when you talk about Stacey Kent, you have to talk about Tim Tomlinson as well, actually, because Mr. Tomlinson plays a huge. Well, he's part of the quartet, or whatever lineup she's using at any given moment. And he writes a lot of the songs, and increasingly he arranges them as well. So they're very much an item, not only in a marital sense, but in a musical and performing sense as well.
And the saxophone is quite important, really, in a lot of these records, particularly.
Well, I mean, I don't know either of them, of course, personally, but Jim Tomlinson is a key. It seems to be he's like some, saxophone playing colossus that bestrides the career of Stacey Kent. So they're very much they come as a pair. It seems to be.
I really like a lot of the albums that she recorded, particularly the ones that she made in the 1990s for Candid Records.
Sure, and I had no idea it's been 20 years since she released her first record. It doesn't time fly. But I've counted some 15 albums as leader or co-leader, probably leader, really. And then there's at least another 5 where she appears on other people's records, maybe a track or 2. And those include something with Humphrey Littleton from the year 2000, Between Friends. And then most recently with Danilo Caymmi, a Brazilian flautist and singer and composer, who is, I think, very well known in Brazil, probably not that well known in Europe, where she appears on one track, and that was released earlier this year, actually. So, I mean, that's quite a prolific output, isn't it? Well, it's one album a year, isn't it?
It's also quite different in many ways, because she doesn't concentrate only on the American standards or on American jazz, but she has done a French album. She has done, as you have mentioned, some Brazilian music, and I think the diversity is an important feature, I guess, of her recorded output of now just about 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that Miss Kent is not only sings in English, but also in French. She speaks fluent French because I believe her paternal grandfather grew up in France, and so she learnt it as a child. And she also speaks fluent Portuguese because she has a huge interest in Brazilian music, which I think, you know, goes right back to the year dot. And so I read she decided she would learn Portuguese and went on some crash course in Brazil for 2 or 3 weeks and came back speaking more or less fluent Portuguese. I'd love it if she was listening to this and she could answer our questions.
Well, what are the chances she would be listening?
Yeah, what are the chances? Absolutely zero, I should think. We can always tag her on Facebook, though. What was I going to make? What was the point about Portuguese? Yeah, so that's me. I mean, I assume that accounts for her popularity in Brazil, if not other parts of South America, and the French stuff. I mean, there's a lot of songs that she sings in French. I mean, the balance has shifted really from the beginning of her career. Her first album, called Close Your Eyes, was recorded in November '96, where everything is they're pretty much all standards, and we come up to the present day, or at least within the last 2 or 3 years. And, you know, all the new releases have at least 2, sometimes more, French songs on them, sung in French. And as a result, she's hugely popular in French-speaking parts of Europe. I don't know whether she's popular in French-speaking West Africa. Maybe not.
Well, the album she recorded in 2010, Raconte-moi, which means something like tell me story, you know, something like that. That one was extremely popular, not only in France but also in Germany, of all places.
Yeah, I think she's hugely popular all over Europe. But I mean, and obviously, if you the French-speaking side probably makes her appeal not only in French-speaking parts of Europe, but also Canada, of course, which I totally forgot about. Desperately thinking up French-speaking areas of the world. West Africa was the first one that came to mind. I wonder if she's popular in Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia. Who knows? I think she does tour there. She certainly goes to Japan quite a bit. So, yeah, I mean, I think she's, you know, she has an enormous fan base, it seems to me, and it's I don't know how popular she is in the United States. She does go on tour there a lot, but she's probably on tour more often outside the US rather than within it. Do you have any idea of what kind of profile she has in America?
Well, I think in America she has, you know, I think she tours overseas a lot more than she does over here. At least I'm sure she's one of these jazz musicians that are, I think, better known outside of the United States than in the United States, although I have a feeling that she does pack in the places whenever she plays in places like Boston or New York City. You know, she's been based out of New York City for a long time, and so I'm sure that while not really a household name in the United States by any means, she's one of these examples of jazzers who are more popular in Europe, maybe in Japan, than they are over here. Not just because of the fact that she sings in French or she sings in Portuguese, but also because of the fact that right now jazz is not the popular music of the day here in the United States, and so it's a lot harder for a lot of the singers and jazz musicians to actually make a buck here in the United States. I think she needs to be rediscovered a little more here in the United States. We need to talk a little bit more about her in this context, and I think, you know, that's one of the reasons why when you mentioned Stacey Kent as a possible subject for today's talk, I was really happy about it because I really like her. But sometimes we tend to forget how diverse and how interesting her recorded output is. I'm not sure exactly if she plays more. She might actually play more concerts overseas than she does over here. I'm not sure about that.
Well, I think she has two. I know that she has two residencies every year. One of them is at Ronnie Scott's in London, and I think they do 4 or 5 nights, probably 5 nights. And the other one is at Birdland in New York, where they also do 5 nights. And they seem to. Sorry, I keep referring to her as they. It's because I'm thinking of her and Jim Thompson. But Stacey Kent appears to do. That's those two residencies are annual events and seem to figure, very largely in or may help to account for her profile, such as it is in both places. And I believe that profile is very high in both places, actually.
Well, her residency there, I think the fact that you mentioned that.
Stacey Kent big at the moment is a real sort of, is an interesting thing. It's you know that the this year's Nobel Prize for Literature has gone to the British author, although in fact he was born in Nagasaki in Japan. Now I always have problems pronouncing it. Kazu Ishiguro,
mm-hmm.
Who and of course what he wrote liner notes for one of Kent's records. I can't remember. I think it was like 2007 or no 2003. And then went on. That's how they made contact with each other, and then went on to pen some lyrics for a number of Stacey Kent originals, or Jim Tomlinson originals, in fact. And suddenly, the guy gets a Nobel Prize. So Stacey Kent, keeps popping up on anything to do with Ishiguro. And she was on Swedish television only. The prize was awarded last week. I saw her interviewed on Swedish television only last week, talking about her work with Ishiguro. And so, how about that? For a stroke of luck, suddenly your lyricist gets a Nobel Prize. Wow.
Well, that's also the beauty of Swedish television as opposed to American television. You would never have anybody like Stacey Kent being interviewed on NBC or CBS or ABC, the major networks, simply because, again, jazz music is not the popular music of the day. However, in a place like Sweden, she does get to be on Swedish TV, and I really wish we were, doing stuff like that over here as well, kind of trying to honor the music that has come out of this country and that is not as, well remembered in this country or honored in this country much anymore, at least not in the mainstream media. So I'm happy to hear that.
Well, I just think that sort of happy confluence of events must have contributed enormously to her profile. Ever since the 2017 prize was announced, which was, I can't remember what it was. That's probably October, and that together, combined with the release of a new album, also in October, that is one hell of a shot, isn't it? Actually, that's what I call lucky.
Well, it definitely is lucky. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay,
You're listening to the voice of Guy Jones, joining us from Stockholm, Sweden, for a new episode, special one today in English. The podcast Discos Memorables, or Memorable Records. He is the founder of the Jan Lundgren fan club, Friends of Jan Lundgren, and also, as he mentioned himself, Fog Arts, a label that reissues digitally some great jazz by the likes of the great Swedish jazz pianist Jan Lundgren and several other jazz musicians as well. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, and I'm talking to you from the northwest of Tennessee. We're talking today about the music of Stacey Kent, jazz vocalist that apparently Guy did not have a lot of formal vocal training when she started singing jazz over in Europe in the early 1990s. But in the mid-1990s, she concentrated on recording some really fantastic albums, mostly for Candid Records. And out of her 20-year-long career, at least recording career, Guy has come up with a selection of 8 different songs from different albums. We normally talk about just one specific album and we make comments about each one of the songs, but in this way the episode today is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be interesting to change the format a little bit, because we're going to pick, or Guy is going to pick 8 different songs. And I don't know if you did this, Guy, chronologically, or if you just did it, on a whim.
Yes, I did do it chronologically, because what I was interested in is whether we could see a progression of some sort, and we might come back to that at the end. Excuse me. Yeah, I picked them chronologically, and I haven't, given that there are at least 15 Stacey Kent albums with her as leader, I haven't, of course, there hasn't. We decided to limit this to 8 tracks. I could only really scratch the surface, but I've tried to spread it out over Miss Kent's 20-year career and come up with songs from 8 different albums. And my first one is from her very first album. She began singing in the 1990s, and she began her career singing regularly at a place called Café Bohème in London, Soho. And after a couple of years, she began opening for better-known acts at Ronnie Scott's, the famous Ronnie Scott's. And not long after that, she released this first album, Close Your Eyes, in 1997. And of course, it features Jim Thomason on tenor sax. He also gets an arranging credit. And then we've got, I think it's a British band, David Newton on piano. We'll come back to Mr. Newton. He's certainly British. Colin Oxley on guitar, also did some arranging. Andrew Clyde Dirt. I'm having real problems with surnames today. On double bass, and Steve Brown on drums. And the liner notes were by Humphrey Lyttelton, who, as we mentioned 5 minutes ago, Stacey did a record with called Between Friends in 2000. Humphrey Lyttelton, very enormously talented, slightly traditional guy, also very clever and funny. Used to do I can't remember when Lyttelton died. It feels like yesterday, but it was probably a decade or so ago. He used to do a very funny program on BBC Radio 4 every week called Jesus, sorry, I have no clue. Anyway, Lyttelton, big figure in the British jazz scene. Again, I do wonder whether Stacey Kent's been particularly lucky in attracting the right kind of people around her. She gets liked by people who are useful. And I'm not saying, I didn't mean to be ungallant in saying that. I just think, she's very lucky compared with a lot of artists who were in that same position 20 years ago. And of course, I think luck only plays a small part. She's enormously talented as well. I think the thing, she has a unique voice. There's no way you can listen to a Stacey Kent record and be confused about who's singing. I don't know whether you agree with that, Anton.
I do agree with that. I wonder if that comes from the fact that she didn't have a lot of formal training. She went by whatever kind of feelings the song kind of concocted, and I'm sure that has a little bit to do with that. But I think she is a really different performer. Her voice is very recognizable, like you say. Whether she be singing, Brazilian material or the Great American Songbook, as she does on this first album that you've chosen, Close Your Eyes. This is basically an album of standards in a fairly standard jazz format. What is it about Close Your Eyes that caught your attention among all these different songs on this album?
Well, I think I could have picked any of them, frankly. But it's Stacey Kent is often referred to as the Queen of Bossa, or rather, I've seen her referred to as the Queen of Bossa. I don't really understand what that means, and it's if you I think it's rather sort of egregious. If you were to pick a queen of bossa, would it be Stacey Kent? I'm not sure. You know, I'd
Probably not.
No, I mean, I suspect Stacey Kent is rather embarrassed by that. But you know, straight away, Close Your Eyes is you know, it's Stacey Kent at her slinkiest in a way. You know, it's got that infectious, you know, bossa bass, and it's got Stacey doing what she does best, which is, you know, clear diction, often finding the hidden melody, you know, playing a standard, singing a standard in a way that other people probably couldn't, you know, finding something new and different to do with it. Full of joy, enthusiasm, and, you know, as I've just sort of implied, a great deal of creativity. And then she's helped in having these fabulous musicians with her, you know, in this case, you know, 5 guys who really know their stuff. And, you know, Tomlinson, particularly on this record, Close Your Eyes, you know, sounds reminiscent at times of Stan Getz or, you know, someone of that caliber. And then, you know, David Newton, I just think is a sensational pianist. And I'll come back to that, actually. And then you've got Colin Oxley, you know, both of them getting some good solo space on this particular record. All of these songs, I've got them written down here from Close Your Eyes, are, you know, I mean, look, it's rather ambitious for an artist who hadn't released an album before to do all these standards. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm Old-Fashioned, or Dream Dancing. I don't know how often do you hear Dream Dancing, actually? More Than You Know, Day In, Day Out, you know. Day in, day out, you know, who would really risk doing something so closely associated with Sinatra? And again, we might come back to that, actually. So I think it requires, you know, it requires a real confidence and guts. And whatever Stacey did before she went to the Guildhall School of Music, as you say, didn't do any of it, you know, formally. Sort of picked it up as she went along. She had something that enabled her to really feel confident with and at home with the music she was singing. So you know, it's a very brave first album. It works extremely well, actually, and turned out to be, I discovered, the best-selling British jazz album of 1997. I'm not quite sure what best-selling means. Does it mean it's sold for fastest in any given period, or does it mean it's sold the largest number of copies? I don't know. But you know, these things are bandied around in jazz anyway, aren't they? So, but I mean, that's a pretty nice little accolade to have if you've never released a record before, isn't it?
Yes, and in fact, as you mentioned before, that she picked things up as she went along. She was actually an English major in college, and she actually changed her mind about the way her career should go when she realized that she could sing, and she spent a long time when she was just as a young kid or as a youth. She spent some time listening to Nat King Cole and to Frank Sinatra, and you know, those two voices were a big influence. Those two styles were a big influence on her career, really from early on. And I think you can tell a little bit on this first album that we're talking about, Close Your Eyes. Particularly about Close Your Eyes, I love the way she phrases the lyrics on this song. And I absolutely love the accompanists, particularly that piano, and the warm saxophone solo in the middle of the song is absolutely fantastic. I think it's a great way to start this career-spanning 8-song selection from Stacey Kent. So well done, Guy, for this first song.
Yeah, and I should perhaps we should remind listeners, if we have any, that I think
we may not.
We've got a Spotify playlist for this, haven't we? Which I guess you will put under the, when you put this recording up on YouTube. I guess you'll provide a link, yeah.
Yes, there'll be a link. It's a playlist called Stacey Kent 20 Years, and you'll be able to listen to I think almost all of these songs should appear, depending on where you are listening to around the world, if you are listening at all. You will find under Stacey Kent 20 Years, one playlist that you guys put together to go along to accompany this show. Shall we move on to the next song?
Yes, let's, because I just want, because the next one is from an album that was released 2 years later called Love Is the Tender Trap. So that was released in 1999. It's a similar lineup in terms of the band. So it's Stacey and then 5 guys, Jim Tomlinson again, David Newton on piano, Colin Oxley again on guitar, a new bass player, David Green, and Jeff Hamilton on drums, who also did some arranging. Now, Jeff Hamilton is an American, of course, and I saw him a couple of years ago in Stockholm. He played the small of the 2 concert halls as a trio, and he had 2, I think they were Israeli pianist, Israeli bass player, who were just outstanding, actually. And of course, Jeff Hamilton, he also plays with, I think he plays a lot with Diana Krall now, or in recent years. But I think they were jolly lucky to have a guy of, again, this young artist, only on I think it was the second album, gets someone of Hamilton's caliber. Not luck, but, great and good fortune that he was willing to do it. The interesting thing about this, it's actually, I picked The Tender Trap, the song we all know and love. Perhaps we all know and love too well, actually, because again, as an example of Kent's ambition and bravery to do something like this. And I think here she really does find, not the hidden tune, but she does find a completely different way of phrasing it, because, coming back to the point I just made about, day in, day out on Close Your Eyes, it's extreme, isn't it very sort of dangerous for someone, for an unknown singer, or relatively unknown by this point, singer, to pick a Sinatra song that everybody associates with Sinatra. Because, if I say to you, whistle The Tender Trap or hum it, you're going to do it, you're going to do it exactly the way Sinatra does it, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that this is a song that is particularly and really intensely associated with Sinatra, and it's a little bit of a risk, as you were saying, and I would say a major risk to not only include this song in an album, but actually title the whole album after this song. But once you listen to the track here, the way that Stacey Kent does it on this album, you can actually hear how she transforms the song in very subtle ways without really losing track of the way Sinatra did the song. That is, you will obviously recognize the melody, you will recognize the way Sinatra sang this song, but there's something different here that she's doing. I can't quite point my finger at what it is exactly, but it's just a fantastic version of this song. And it's
I think it is, and maybe part of that is the fact that it's a woman singing it rather than a man.
Could be.
That is, sexist as that might sound, it isn't meant to. That comes as a little bit unexpected.
It is, even though this is a song where...
Given that we associate the song with, the original macho He-Man, Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, but if you think about the lyrics of the song, in this case, the song is Sinatra commenting on what love feels to him, and not necessarily a manly sort of perspective, right? So I think it's a song that a woman could sing just as well as a man could. It's true, though, that because it's so closely associated with Sinatra, you don't get a lot of female vocalists that pick this song to include in their records or their live act. And I think that might be one of the reasons why it sounds different and it sounds fresh. I think it's also, the incredible way in which these accompanists gel together with her voice and not getting in the way of the way that she sings the song. I think it really is a lovely version of it, and to me, it really is a standout from this album. It's actually the album opener, And the album, by the way, is not one of her candid albums. This one was released on the legendary but also quite obscure label Chiaroscuro Records. So really lovely album, and I think it's another great choice because it's one of the standouts for me on this Love is the Tender Trap album.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is. And I just remembered, in fact, that there's another song, there's another sort of Sinatra classic on this album, which is In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning.
Yes, exactly.
So not just one, she doesn't just tackle one Sinatra classic head on, she tackles two, and comes out of both with more than flying colours. I also picked this track, The Tender Trap, because I love David Newton's piano solo on it. And, although Stacey Kent doesn't really do long songs, I mean, this version is 4 minutes 42. The Close Your Eyes, the one I picked earlier, is actually slightly over 5 minutes. But, a lot of Stacey Kent, Stacey Kent?
Stacey Kent.
Stacey Kent's songs are, they can be as short as 2.5 minutes. And she doesn't really do, 7, 8 minutes. It's not very unusual. But in this one, The Tender Trap, David Newton, the pianist, gets a very long solo, and a very exciting one, actually. He really lets rip. And I think that's quite interesting, too, because seldom are the soloists allowed to let rip on Stacey Kent records. I don't know whether that's a deliberate choice, because, the longer she's been in the business, perhaps the more she's decided on her formula. And it is a formula, isn't it, in a way? The material, it's based around a certain kind of mood, feeling. The bossa thing is never that far away. It's all quite, if I call it manners, that's not the right adjective. That sounds as though it's stilted in some way. But there's a pattern that Stacey Kent records tend to meet. And, it's unusual to let a soloist rip. And I should add, when I saw her in concert in Spain in the summer, there was only one solo of any length, and that was oddly enough, that was the drummer's solo. A British drummer called Josh Morrison. Jim Thomason gets little solos all the time, of course, on whether it's the flute or the saxophone. But, you don't normally get a long solo. Sometimes I wish the band would be allowed to let rip a bit more, actually, and the songs were longer. But if you're doing very short ones, there isn't time. But here, David Newton gets a real stab at it. And part of me often wonders, I think by this time, 1999, Newton had been playing with them for quite a while. Newton's had a very long career, actually, and a very illustrious one. And he's still going. I mean, he was born in '58, so it's not as though he's super old. What does that make him? 59, isn't it?
Just about. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Just about 59. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, 59. So, I wish, he really sounds like he's been unchained. To say, okay, David, you can have one monstrous, let it all hang out solo, but don't expect any more. And it comes off beautifully. But bits of it remind me of Dudley Moore. Actually, I'm not quite sure why, but I think that Newton can play anything, and he doesn't. Most of these songs, because they are so sort of carefully controlled and arranged and put together and executed, it seems like the wilder aspects of the musician's abilities are always being reined in. But in this particular case, Newton lets rip, and the results are phenomenal, and they work very well with Stacey Kent's vocals too. So I don't know whether you noticed the solo on this. It's I like best about it.
It's definitely a solo that, and I was revisiting these songs in the last few days to prepare for the conversation. That is definitely a solo where I left whatever I was doing, and I listened closely. I was sort of taken in by the solos. It's really well done. It's really exciting, and like you say, it's a standout track. These first two songs that we talked about, "Close Your Eyes" and "The Tender Trap," are two standards, and the next song is another standard. It presents Stacey Kent doing Victor Young. And
that's right. Now, this is the album I mentioned earlier. Jan Lundgren Trio plays the music of Victor Young. This particular track, was Stacey singing "My Foolish Heart," was recorded in Copenhagen in August 2000, but the album was released in 2001. And it's Jan Lundgren, the Swede, Jan Lundgren on piano, fellow Swede Matthias Svensson on bass, Rasmus Schulberg, who's a Dane, on drums. They're not on this track. This particular track is just a duo with Lundgren on piano and Stacey on vocals. It's a very short track. You know, this is one of the shortest tracks. It must surely be. It's only 2:49 in length. There are only 3 Stacey Kent tracks on this album. The other 2 are "Street of Dreams" and "I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You." And I picked this because the other 2, "Street of Dreams" and "I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You," both feature the trio. And I thought this was nice, and it's the only example in our playlist of Stacey with a single accompanist. And I think she really does the song justice. And I always find it terribly moving to listen to, actually. And of course, I'm partial to it because I love, you know, Lundgren's piano, and I think, you know, they're both actually masters at improvising on something that's well known and finding new angles and aspects to it. And I think this particular track, what is again a very well known song. I always think of "My Foolish Heart" as a very well known song, but a difficult one to pull off successfully. Both of them excel. It just shows what a good accompanist Jan Lundgren is, actually. But Stacey Kent is magnificent. It's almost as though she's breathing in your ear, and she's at her most sort of wistful and demure and intimate. And it's for that reason that I feel this particular track stands out. It may interest you to know that as the guy who runs the digital label that reissued this last year, I mean, I see the figures for the streams and the downloads. I mean, nobody downloads anymore, but streams are the important thing. And these 3 Stacey Kent tracks from that album we're only a little outfit, so we've got 9 albums. And these 3 tracks are always at the top of the streaming numbers, always. It's actually, I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You is always the most popular. And then, you know, the other 2 bob around at positions 2, 3, occasionally 4. But it's the Stacey Kent tracks that have the most appeal.
Well, my Foolish Heart is definitely one of those classic, almost classical, I would say, Victor Young ballads that pretty much everyone has done. This is a very moving performance of "My Foolish Heart" with Jan Lundgren on piano and Stacey Kent on vocals. When I was listening to it, it brought me back to albums like the duet album that Stan Kenton and June Christie did, or even the Doris Day Andre Previn album, where she actually sings, not the song I don't think, but Close Your Eyes is one of the songs that Doris Day does on that. But the idea is just piano, just vocals, and a song that, as you say, is perfect for that whispering in your ear sort of atmosphere. And I think the 2 of them pull this off really, really nicely. And this, I mean, of course, as we will see as the conversation progresses, we will have different songs. There's a lot of diversity on these 8 songs, but this might have to be one of my very favorites among the 8 that you've chosen.
I agree. It's certainly one of mine. And did you know that? Did you know, by the way, that "I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You" is also Bing Crosby gets a credit.
That's right. It's I think Ned Washington wrote the co-wrote that, and maybe somebody else. I can't remember the other guy's name, but Bing Crosby definitely contributed some lyrics to that. Bing was not the kind of man that would tag his name to a song unless he had actually contributed a little bit. And this song, "Ghost of a Chance," was a song that was really dear to him. When he sang it for his musical autobiography in the 1950s, he never mentioned that he had written any of the lyrics, but in fact he had contributed some of the lyrics to "I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance," which is also one of the songs that Sinatra included on his very first album called The Voice. And I'm wondering if that is perhaps the the Sinatra version that Stacey Kent had on her mind as she was approaching "Ghost of a Chance" with Jan Lundgren or not. We don't know. If Stacey is listening, which she very well may be, she can also always comment underneath the video here and let us know. But definitely to go back to "My Foolish Heart," it really is a standout from that really interesting Jan Lundgren album. The Lundgren Trio play the music of Victor Young. Another great choice guy on here. It really is lovely track.
Before we move on to the next track, I should say this is extremely topical. I actually had lunch with Jan Lundgren today, and I asked him about, and I knew we were going to do this podcast, so I said, how did you decide which songs to do for this album? When it comes to Stacey Kent. And he said, well, what we did is, and this is way back, don't forget, this is a long time ago, 17 years ago, 16, 17 years ago, 17 years ago in 2000. And so what he did was, he was the one who wanted to do this Victor Young album. And so he picked about 15 songs that he thought would work for Stacey Kent, and he sent them to her. He probably faxed them, actually, because I doubt whether Lundgren's a bit of a Luddite, so I can't imagine him doing email in 2000. So he sent Stacey this list of 15 or so Victor Young songs, and then she sent back 3 or 4 or whatever it was that she would be happy to have a go at, and with her suggested key, which is terribly important. So then in between receipt of this information and the record being made in Copenhagen, Jan rehearsed with the trio for the trio numbers, "Street of Dreams" and "I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You," and also worked out an arrangement with for "My Foolish Heart." But he said that it was only about sort of 3 hours studio work, the whole thing. Each track took about an hour, possibly less. They'd already done their rehearsals. They had an idea of what they wanted to do. Stacey knew how she wanted to play it. Jan had an idea too, and they knew what key it was going to be in, and so they managed to get it down extremely quickly.
So they did it the old-fashioned way then, in that way, because it didn't take them long. They knew what they wanted to do, and they just canned it, and that's great. It really, in the case of "My Foolish,"
that's testament to the quality of their musicianship, isn't it?
I think so. And in the case of "My Foolish Heart," it really does show how, at least in a sense, it's quite spontaneous. The way that they play this. I'm sure there has been some thought that went into it, but it comes across as very spontaneous, as just two people playing and singing together, and I think that's one of the reasons why this track works so well. Thank you for that topical information, by the way, Guy. I really appreciate that. Now, the next one is another great standard, but we're moving into Brazilian territory now.
Exactly.
Taking a trip to South America now.
We've got I picked. There's an album called Brazilian Sketches, which has actually appeared as it was Jim Tomlinson, husband of Stacey Kent, billing as leader, and I don't think it was his first album. I think it was his second, really. But inevitably, being a sensible chap, Jim decides to include Stacey on 1 or 2 numbers, and one of them is "I Concentrate on You." another iconic Sinatra track.
Yes.
You know, it's unbelievable, isn't it? When is this woman never gives in? So, you know, they pick this and they take it pretty slow. Again, we've got this kind of bossa underlay and highly confident, you know, sensual, seductive, all those things that we associate with Stacey Kent, and pulled off magnificently. And you know, it's. I think this is a very kind of. I don't know how much this album sold. Probably not that well, actually. As I say, but we're really getting into Brazilian or South American territory here. We recorded it in 2001. It wasn't actually released until 2003, probably because it would have got in the way of some Stacey Kent as leader albums. I can't quite remember the chronology of all this. But we've got another terrific band with Jim Tomlinson totally in charge here. No flute on this, but plenty of tenor sax, guitars, piano, double bass, drums, percussion, and we're getting a lot of Yo Beam and other South American classics, or pieces anyway, even if they're not classics, featured on this album, including Yo Beam's Dreamer, where Stacey Kent doesn't sing, she just la-la-las.
Which is basically what Joe Beam did in the Sinatra album that they did together, right?
Well, and that brings me to the subject of, you know, Stacey Kent again, you know, because it's all about taste with Stacey Kent, isn't it? And again, I'm not being derogatory. I've never heard Stacey Kent scat. Have you?
No, not really. I think you're right. Now, the la-la-lying is not really scatting in there.
No, exactly. What she does is, you know, she might repeat the odd word. She la-la-las, do-do-dos, you know, hums a bit. You know, it's all very measured and you know, fits the music, or this kind of music anyway, so much better than scatting. I really do loathe scatting. What is the point of it?
Well, you know, some people tend to overdo the scatting, as though scatting were the only way to be a jazz singer. Now, if you don't scat, you're no jazz singer.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake. Singing jazz is not necessarily about scatting. Scatting might be an element of the singing style of a specific singer, but it may not. You don't really need to have it in there. You may include it if you feel like it adds something to your performance, but just scatting for the sake of scatting, I know what you mean. It's not an absolute necessity, and I don't think that Stacey Kent cares much for scatting herself. She may enjoy listening to other scatters, but she doesn't necessarily think that that belongs in her own singing style. So no, I don't necessarily dislike scatting if it's well done, if it's done by the classic singers who knew where they were going with it. But scatting for the sake of it doesn't really sound like something that I want to listen to.
No, I mean, the la-la-la-ing, when I was picking these tunes, it just reminded me that I've never heard Stacey Kent's scat. And I'd be very curious to know what her opinion is of scatting. You know, is it because she doesn't like it? Is it because she doesn't feel she's very good at it? Or is it because she doesn't feel that it's appropriate for the kind of approach she takes to the music she sings? I'd like to think it's all three, actually. You know, and you and I have talked about scatting before, and I always remember when we first talked about it, your comment was scatting has to have a reason, and you'll find that with most artists scatting, there's no bloody reason for it whatsoever. And if I'm paying money to go to a concert, or for that matter to buy a record, I want a singer to sing. I don't want him or her to make noises like a trombone. And I think that's my primary objection to it. And I just can't see the point to it either. You know, I can't see the appeal of what is basically a novelty, often a deeply embarrassing one, or something that simply has no musical purpose.
I usually loathe it when it becomes the main focus of what the singer does.
Yeah.
There has to be more to somebody singing than just the scatting. To me, the scatting is more of an accessory whenever it makes sense. So what you said that I said a long time ago when we first talked about this, the fact that it has to have a reason, that I think, I agree with that comment simply because, I just think that if it doesn't have a purpose, it actually detracts from the performance, and that's why I said that whenever I said that, and it's because of that. I think in the case of Stacey Kent, she's very precise with what she does, and she knows that the scatting does not add to her style, does not add to her performances, and so she kind of stays politely away from it. I think.
Well, yes, I wonder because we just talked about the Jan Lundgren album that we picked a Stacey Kent song from, and I mentioned it also features Johnny Griffin and the American singer Deborah Brown. I saw Deborah Brown play in Ystad in Sweden in the summer as well, because I went to the Spanish Jazz Festival and the Swedish one, and Deborah Brown was a real revelation to me, actually. Do you know that she plays the piano? She's a beautiful pianist, actually. And I'd never seen her live before. Terrific. But she does a version on that Jan Lundgren record of Stella by Starlight, and she scats through most of it. And I just loathe it. Actually, I just thought, why? Please stop. It's Stella by Starlight is such a lovely song. Deborah takes it a pretty up-tempoed lick, and then scats the largest part of it. Baffling. And I think Deborah Brown is actually a good scatter, knows how to do it. And when I saw her in the summer, the scatting that she did had a point to it. But I just can't imagine Stacey Kent scatting Stella by Starlight. Can you?
What I really like about this song, I Concentrate on You, on the Brazilian Sketches album by Jim Tomlinson, is actually the mood that the group creates and how it really fits the voice of Stacey Kent perfectly. I think there are some critics that I've read who have mentioned that Brazilian music and the bossa nova in the 1960s, the bossa nova was about one of the best things that happened to pop music and to jazz music in those years. And I tend to agree with that because it's a kind of music that really blends in very well with jazz when it's well done. And of course, it's wonderful on this album, Brazilian Sketches, and on this particular song that you chose, I Concentrate on You, which is one of the greatest standards by the one and only Cole Porter. You're listening to a new episode of the Discos Memorables, or Memorable Records podcast. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, and today, thanks to the magic of the internet, we are talking to Guy Jones over in Stockholm, Sweden, the founder of the Jan Lundgren fan club, Friends of Jan Lundgren, and also Fog Arts, the digital reissue label that has some really interesting stuff for downloading, for streaming, some good European jazz. Now, the next song that you've chosen might be one of my least favorite ones for some reason. I've always found it a little boring for some reason, but it's a song that appears. Does it appear in an album called "The Changing Lights"? Is that right? Or is
yes, it? Yeah. The song I picked was "The Changing Lights," and it's from the album, the eponymous album, "The Changing Lights," which actually was released. It was recorded between November 2012 and April 2013, released in 2013. So it's some 10 years later on from Brazilian Sketches and I Concentrate on You. So what has happened in that decade? The Changing Lights as an album is a sort of 50-50 mix of South American songs and Jim Tomlinson originals. So we've kind of left the standards completely at this point, and Stacey Kent has moved over to well-known and not so well-known South American material, or Brazilian specifically. material, and originals by Jim Tomlinson. Tomlinson doesn't do lyrics, so he has to get someone to help him. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is on some website that he used to write. So that's a task that he songwriting is a task he always performs in unison with somebody else, and it isn't Stacey Kent. So in this case, I mean, the Brazilian tracks on this album are lovely ones. You know, One Note Samba, I think Stacey Kent does that enormously well, and it's a brilliant one to listen to live. What else have we got? How Insensitive, The Face I Love.
Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars.
Yeah, I mean, you know, wonderful tunes by wonderful Brazilian composers, and then these originals, and this is where Ishiguro comes in, because it's quite. I mean, Ishiguro wrote the liner notes to Stacey Kent's 2003 album. You know, what is a novelist doing writing liner notes for an album? Well, Ishiguro was, you know, always rather fancied the idea of being a musician. I think he plays extremely badly by his own admission. I know all this from watching various interviews with him in the last couple of weeks. And so he was on a BBC Radio 4 programme called Desert Island Discs in you know, the early 2002 actually, and picked one of Stacey Kent's songs. They can't take that away from me, actually. And then she heard about this and said, "Oh, that's, you know, wow, this is very flattering. This novelist in pre-Nobel Prize days, of course. this great novelist has picked one of my songs." And they got in touch with each other, and one thing led to another, and Ishiguro wound up producing lyrics for 3 of the Tomlinson songs on this album, and The Changing Lights is one of them. And that led to several other collaborations with Ishiguro. I picked this song because I like the melody and I like the playing, but I really don't like the lyrics. And I just thought, and I'm not suggesting it's an error of judgment on Stacey Kent's part, because, you know, Hell's Bells, she'd been doing this, you know, Queen of Bossa act and all standards for some, you know, getting on for 15 years, and needed to do something new, and you know, exciting and flattering to work with a novelist, or in this case, lyricist of Ishiguro's standing. But I'm not quite sure it comes off, and I find the lyrics distracting, and it begs the question, you know, to what extent do lyrics, can they distract? Well, of course they can. And conversely, if the lyrics are sort of prosaic and, you know, predictable and just basically about love, as most standards are, they're not, you know, most of the lyrics of standards are not terribly interesting. Does that spoil your enjoyment of the music? And I think the answer to that is no. However, I find these slightly laboured Ishiguro lyrics quite a handicap to listening to getting the most from this song, even though it's a great melody and it's nicely arranged, and it's always a pleasure to hear Kent sing. And I kind of have to listen to it through clenched teeth, if you can listen to things through clenched teeth.
I wondered, Guy,
have you actually listened to the lyrics of this?
I think, you know, one of the reasons why in my notes for the podcast I had some, you know, not so flattering notes about this particular track. It might have to do with the fact that I listened to it in sequence after the other 4 standards that we began the show with, and then we get, you know, from those standards that are clever and witty in a simple sort of way when it comes to the lyrics, because I think that's what makes a standard as far as the lyrics go, is that these standards are written talking basically always about the same thing: love or loss of love, or whatever it is, feelings of different kind. but it's usually done in a very witty way because it's simple. When you get to the lyrics of The Changing Lights, it's a little more belabored, and it's just a little bit, less simple, and so it doesn't come across as, it doesn't work as well, for me. But it might also be because I listened to 4 great standards right before I listened to this track, and so you can tell the difference. What made a Berlin, or what made a Porter, was the sophistication of the lyrics, but in a seemingly simple way. Cole Porter makes you think like you could write those lyrics, or Ira Gershwin makes you think that you could write those lyrics, in very much the way Bing Crosby makes you think like in the shower you could sing like him. And I think, this is something that's not true of The Changing Lights, and for me, it becomes less interesting, it becomes less powerful, and it works a lot worse.
Yeah, I just, it's very, Stacey Kent has very clear diction, so you don't think, oh, what did she just sing? It's very clear to you can understand virtually every word of what she's saying, which isn't the case with every singer, of course. But so I could actually write the lyrics down, and I find them. I thought this song was, the first time I heard this, I thought it was autobiographical. It was in some way about Kent and Tomlinson's relationship, and then I realised it can't be, because at the end they part. I think they part. And I find, there's something rather sort of smug and self-satisfied about this song. Oh, were we leaving Rio, or were we in New York? There's a lot of this travelogue stuff in Ishiguro's lyrics. And then he said, you leaned against the window to see the traffic up ahead. These commuters here, you said, could be the Walking Dead. I don't know. It's all sort of,
Yeah, well...
Is it Kent and Tomlinson cocooned in this sort of world where luck is always on their side and everybody else is sort of hopeless? And then the next line is, then we laughed about the hopelessness of so many people's lives. And, it's a bit like being stuck in a travelogue of sort of self-reverential, something or other, or like a trip through Stacey Kent's frequent flyer statement. There's another. Ishiguro is always doing this, and I find it, okay, good on him for trying, but should he perhaps be? Well, I think it's an argument I just can't win, isn't it? Because you just say, well, he won a Nobel Prize,
but not for writing these lyrics.
Well, he won it for the novels, not for the lyrics, and there are a lot of, from this point on, 2013, there are a lot of Ishiguro collaborations with Stacey Kent, and I'm, they've got some strangely obscure and sort of disjointed lyrics. There's the Isotel, that's a very nice tune. The lyrics from that aren't that bad, but this is like being stuck in a travelogue. It talks about Paris, Venice, Verona, Hawaii, Tahiti in the space of about 4 minutes. It's just becomes intolerable after a while. And then there's another one, which is Breakfast on the Morning Tram, which is an earlier album from 2007. Where Breakfast on the Tram is quite an interesting song, but it's just, what are they talking about? It's actually borrowed from Ishiguro's 4th novel, The Unconsoled, which I haven't read, and so he's sort of lifting the end of the story and sort of transposing it on this Jim Tomlinson song, and I just don't think the song works, but the lyrics are just baffling, actually. Obscure, stilted, weird, and, as I say, a little bit smug. So I find that, I was kind of disappointed, even though I like The Changing Lights as an album. I like all of the Brazilian songs. I like the melodic elements of the Ishiguro pieces by Tomlinson. I just don't like the lyrics.
There's a lot of Brazilian material on that album, The Changing Lights, and for the next song we're actually going back into Brazilian territory, because in this case we have a collaboration between Stacey Kent and the Brazilian great Marcos Valle. This is a live album that they recorded together in Rio, in Brazil, and the song that you chose from that album is The Answer, or in Portuguese, A Resposta, and it's a live version. It's really, again, one of my favorite tracks in the whole playlist that you put together, Guy. Tell us a little bit about this collaboration between Stacey Kent and Marcos Valle.
Well, I think I have no idea how this collaboration started, but I mean, I mean, clearly Kent has had a big admiration for the music of Brazil for a long, long time, and you know, that being the case, you can't really. Marcos Valle is probably in the what is he? We would say in the second wave of bossa, the first comprising, you know, chiefly Yobi, Gilberto. So, you know, the work of Marcos Valle is hard to ignore, and she recorded it on plenty of occasions before this album was made in 2013. And you realise, actually, in bringing all these songs together, how many are there? I'm not quite sure. Is it 10 or 12 or something? You realise just what a fantastically accomplished composer he was, and also, you know, doing songs that you didn't realise he'd written. Actually, they're songs that we know, but we can't really, unless we're aficionados of Brazilian music, you know, who wrote this? Was it Gilberto? Was it Jobim? Was it Valle? We can't really remember, but yet, you know, when they bring them all together, you think, wow, okay, he did this, he did that, he did, you know, he did crickets for Anna Maria, he did Batucuda, you know, he did all these things, which The Face I Love, you know, which we probably couldn't have remembered. And in this case, it's quite a big band, you know. There's a reasonable horn section. Valle appears on the piano, and the electric piano as well, Fender at some point. And it's a massively entertaining and adrenaline-filled, exciting record. And it must have been great to be at the gigs where this thing was recorded. It must have been so exciting, actually. But you still get a sense of that excitement in listening to the album. You know, there's also a DVD of this, but I think it's with Valle at Birdland in New York. It's not in Rio. But I think this is one of my favourite Stacey Kent albums, actually, and particularly because, you know, the blending of her and Marcos Valle, who sings, of course. You know, I mean, he doesn't just play, and he doesn't just compose these things. He sings. I mean, he's like all of these guys from that era. You know, I don't think his voice was ever fantastic, but it just doesn't matter, because it's got that, you know, ubiquitous character, that thing that everybody wants, but can't define or can't articulate.
Yeah, it's like what we were talking about regarding Astrid Gilberto the other day on Facebook, right? It doesn't have to be a fantastic voice; it just has to work for that kind of music.
Yeah.
Now, what is it about this particular song, The Answer, or A Resposta, that
I don't know really.
You
I
enjoy?
could have picked any of them, actually, because I quite like it. It's very upbeat. Bearing in mind where it sits within our playlist, you know, you've gone from the sort of let's say, introspective approach of The Changing Lives, and we go back to this upbeat, you know, happy, simple, simply worded Brazilian number that kind of makes you want to get up and dance and sing along to.
How different is this? How different is the sound of this Brazilian song when you compare it to the one you chose from the Brazilian sketches?
Yes, because it's a proper Brazilian song written by a proper Brazilian guy. I Concentrate on You was written by a Porter, wasn't it? So, you know, it's not. I'm not saying it's a copy or even an approximation. It's a kind of it's a Western European or American interpretation of a bossa nova song. You know, The Answer is a proper Brazilian song, and I think that's what makes it different. It doesn't make it any better. It doesn't make it better. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with "I Concentrate on You," but given the latter's associations with Sinatra and the Great American Songbook, the former, the answer being done by the guy who composed it, Stacey Kent, is a wonderful melding of these two cultures. But we're very clearly listening to some Brazilian music.
That's one of the things.
If she sung it in the original Portuguese, we'd be 100% there, wouldn't we?
That's one of the things I like about this album is that Stacey Kent understands this kind of Brazilian music, and she wants to go to the root of it. She's performing in Brazil, recording in Brazil with great Brazilian musicians, and not just making Americanized or European version of the music, but actually going there where the music was born and playing with the people that really understand the music, which in turn tells you that she understands this kind of music. It's a fantastic album. It's called Ao Vivo, which means live, with Marcos Valle and Stacey Kent. And it's really an album that if you want to listen to Stacey Kent and understand the kind of Brazilian music that she likes and that she can sing really well, this is an album that I would definitely recommend to anyone who might be listening out there.
Yes, and then while we're on this, so I mean, moving on from that album, which is the sort of, I mean, it's got to be the quintessential Stacey Kent Brazilian tribute, hasn't it? Moving on from that, I picked one track from an album that isn't a Stacey Kent album, and it probably isn't very well known in Europe. And it's the track is Estrada do Sol, and it's from an album of Danilo Caymmi. We did. I hope I got that right.
Close enough.
Singing Canta Tom Jobim. Sings Tom Jobim. Antonio Carlos Jobim. And they're all Jobim songs, some of which we know, some of which I wasn't aware of. And Stacey's on one of them, and called Estrada do Sol, which I think means Road of the Sun, doesn't it?
Yeah, Road of the Sun or Highway of the Sun, something like that. Yes.
Yeah. So it's a very small lineup because it's Caymmi is another important Brazilian figure. Probably people really aren't aware of who he is in Europe. He comes from a very musical family. He was an accompanist for Jobim. He was a member of Jobim's Banda Nova. He's written soundtracks for several TV series in Brazil. He's recorded 7 albums as a solo artist. He's written music for who else? His mother is a former singer. He's got a sister who is very well known in Brazil. He plays the flute and the acoustic guitar, and he is an extremely good interpreter of Jobim on this particular album. And I think my understanding is that for this track, they didn't actually make it together in the studio. I think he did his part and then sent it to wherever Stacey Kent was, either the US or the UK, and so she did it remotely in the studio. And I think even though Caymmi is very well known for his flute playing, Jim Tomlinson, who also plays the flute as well as the tenor sax, like all reed players actually. Why do they always play the flute? I think he plays the flute part on this. So, but I might be wrong about that. And I tried to get an answer, but couldn't find one about this. But I think Tomlinson, I think it's him playing the flute on this. And again, this is where Stacey Kent's ineffable good taste really shows through. Because you've got another, like Marcos Valle, Caymmi is not a great He's not the world's greatest singer, but again, you know, he's old. He's older. He's experienced. You know, he knows everybody who matters in Brazilian music. He's terrifically, you know, he's a great composer himself. He understands Jobim's legacy and all the catalogue that he left behind. And so, you know, when he's singing, or particularly when he's playing, you know, he does the songs real justice. This album got very little publicity. You know, it appears on Stacey Kent's website, but there's no words about it. It's quite hard to find, isn't it? Because you and I, we had a problem. You know, there was some US copyright problem on Spotify, and so this record doesn't appear on the US version of Spotify. And I think, will you include a link to where you found it on YouTube?
Actually, it was hard to find, but when I was finally able to listen to the song, it really was, Guy, and I can tell you this, a very pleasant surprise for me, because this is a song, of course, I had never heard before, but I found myself playing it over and over again, more than any of the other ones that you have chosen.
But I think this song is quite well known in Brazil, because we don't know it in the US or Europe.
No, it's true. It's one of those obscure songs around here, but then in Brazil, you know, it's a very well-known track, and it's just a perfect blending of these two people playing together, a kind of music that they really love, and it's just a thrilling melody, wonderful performance, and again, yeah, I mean, one of the biggest surprises out of this that came out of the show for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely tune, and I don't know why it's not better known over here. Actually, I find it very surprising. Why don't we know this Jobim song? You know, but it just carries you away, and I think, you know, the combination of Kaime's slightly gravelly delivery and Stacey Kent's sort of, you know, again, seductive, you know, gentle, you know, soft, you know, intimate delivery is astonishing, actually. And, you know, she kind of tunes, you know, la la la's a bit, do do's from time to time, repeats the odd word, you know, all done like a, you know, summer breeze wafting across the beach, Rio.
Sings in Portuguese too on this one.
And she sings it in Portuguese, yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's I mean, like the rest of the album, you know, it's a very small group. You know, it's just Kaime on vocals and flute for most of it, apart from, I think, Tomlinson on this one, and then Flavio Mendes on guitar, and a guy called Hugo Pilger, it looks like. Pilger is how we would say it in England, on cello, and that's it. You know. And it's one of the best ways to approach this music, isn't it? You know, in the previous selection, we had a pretty big band headed by Marcus Valle doing this stuff. That works brilliantly. But then you come down to this, you know, stripped down, very intimate lineup, and the results are different but equally magnificent.
Well, simplicity again, or seeming simplicity, is what brings these songs together with the standards, and it's something that, in my opinion, is missing on the Changing Lights, and that's why I didn't take as kindly to that one. But this one, Estrada do Sol, or Road of the Sun, Danilo Kaime and Stacey Kent singing and playing together, is really a lovely track. If you can find it, you should definitely give it a listen. We're getting closer now to the ending of the 8-song career-spanning selection that Guy Jones put together for this special edition of the Discos Memorables, or Memorable Records podcast, which will soon be available on YouTube. And this last song, Guy, comes from one of Stacey Kent's latest albums called I Know I Dream, the orchestral sessions that came out on OK Records. Is there still an OK Records? I didn't even know.
No, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is actually in terms of. I think it depends what country you're in. Mm-hmm. I mean, I never understand the way record companies work, but I mean, basically, I think Stacey Kent used to be distributed by Warner and this is her first record that would be distributed, released, whatever it is, by Sony.
In any case, it was released in 2017.
Yeah,
and it actually in a 20-year,
a couple of months ago in October.
In a 20-year long career, though, the interesting thing here is this is her very first, if I'm not mistaken, this is her very first album with an orchestra, very first orchestral outing that Stacey Kent has made. I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but in any case,
no, you're right.
That's how it has been promoted.
Yeah, it's the first. I mean, it's the first orchestral song she's produced, and my understanding is that Sony said, "Well, what do you want to do?" You know, given that it's the first time they've worked together after all those years with Warner or whoever the other company Can did, and she said, "Well, you know, I feel ready to do a record with an orchestra." And she'd never really done that. She hadn't done that. She hadn't recorded a record with an orchestra. So we've sort of got the standard quartet, which is, again, Tomlinson on saxophone, flute, Graham Harvey. Graham Harvey is another terrific British pianist who I saw in Spain. Double bass, Jeremy Brown. Drums, Josh Morrison. They might be off one or two of the tracks because the orchestras, you know, could make substitutions as well. But it's I think it's we're talking about if we take the quartet, if we include the quartet, this is an orchestra of 58 people, so it's enormous, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's a selection of original material, 2 Jobim songs, some other I think they're Brazilian tracks, a couple of French numbers. The Changing Lights makes an appearance on this one as well. And
the great Bob Haim song, That's All, is in there too.
Yeah, and well, that's what I say. I mean, That's All is, I almost picked That's All, actually, because, you know, it's the, well, isn't it, it's the only real standard on this album. And she does it beautifully, actually, and works incredibly well with the orchestra. The arrangements were done by a combination of Mr. Tomlinson again and a chap called Tommy Lawrence. And it also marks the start of a new Tomlinson writing partnership with because there's a couple of originals here, and Make It Up is one of them. Tomlinson he's done the music for Make It Up, and the other one is I Know I Dream, the title track, in fact. And the lyricist is a guy called Cliff Goldmacher, who I think is from Nashville, close to you, but now lives in Sonoma. And I don't know how he and Jim Thompson got together, but Goldmacher has been knocking around for a long time. He claims to have written 1,000 songs on his website, but he seems like a very nice chap. I watched a TED talk of him, and he sort of combines music with education and, you know, consulting and goodness knows what. I mean, we all have to earn a buck somehow. But I think these 2 Goldmacher Tomlinson songs are great. And Make It Up is I think it's become one of my favourite Stacey Kent songs, actually. And it's a good version here, but it took me a while to get used to this orchestrated version because it felt a little rushed and overblown in places. I like it. I've seen them they played Make It Up when they came on as their first song at San Xavier in Spain last summer. And it's a really exciting and fun way to start a concert. And it seems to me, it just brings together everybody's strengths. Okay, there's nothing. The lyrics are, you know, there's nothing irritating about the lyrics. They don't give them away. They're not prosaic, but they're not sort of pretentious either. You know, they're fun. It's talking about, you know, well, it doesn't really matter what it's talking about, but it combines, you know, good lyrics, really strong melody, that nice sort of bossa nova thing that we associate with Stacey Kent and Jim Tomlinson. Fun solos for the band. It's a great song to introduce the band to. You know, yeah, Jim Thompson on sax. Whoa, Graham Harvey on keys. Whoa, you know, because you can do that near the end. I've seen them do that on the DVD. That they played this. This song isn't very old, but I've seen them do it in France maybe a year ago or something. And then Stacey Kent's wonderful singing. So you know, a very strong song to end our list on, and one that I find myself humming this song on a very, very regular basis. And when I was putting this list together, I kept listening to it, and I found it very hard to turn it off. I mean, I'll happily listen to it, you know, 5 plays in a row, and then come back to it an hour later. I like it that much. I think it's a very, very good song.
It's the kind of song that you know, one wishes that we had more of these days. You know, it's really a clever song. It's well written, and you know, the lyrics not being written by a Nobel Prize. It's a lot more a lot more simple, and I think you know, that serves it quite well. I think in many ways, Guy, every jazz singer dreams at some point of making a record with a full orchestra. I think throughout the history of vocal jazz, you see how a lot of these you know, jazz singers, from Billie Holiday to, you know, Ella Fitzgerald to, you know, Lee Wiley, you know, whoever it is, wants to make an album with a full orchestra, because it just, if it's well done, it really adds to the sound, it really adds to the performance. And I think in the case of this new album, I Know I Dream, this actually happens. It's a really good combination of the standard quartet with a large orchestra. You might think, wow, in excess of 50 musicians, that's a lot, right? But it really works really well because it's done tastefully. And I think the word tasteful is one that comes to mind whenever we listen to the voice and to the records of Stacey Kent.
Yeah, and by the way, and if there is anyone listening to this podcast, if you want to listen to I Know I Dream, the album, on Spotify, pick the deluxe version, because there's a normal one and there's something called the deluxe version, because the deluxe version has got 2 bonus tracks. One is the Ice Hotel, the song I mentioned, the very extremely nice song I mentioned earlier, despite the Ishiguro travelogue, which is, you know, it's an interesting, you know, reinterpretation of their own piece, or Thomason piece. And then the other one is a very interesting song. I think arguably the most interesting on the whole record, actually. There's no orchestra. I don't know what it's doing on this album, or whether it's recorded at the same session. But it's a French song called Le Soleil Noir, the Black Sun, I suppose, written by someone called Barbara. I had to Google that. Barbara. Have you ever heard of Barbara?
It's a French singer.
Quite recently. French. It's a French song. Barbara, just her name's Barbara, and I think she was. I don't know, pop artist.
Yeah, I think the French would pronounce it Barbara, you know, and it's she's actually a pretty well known, or has been a pretty well known French pop singer for many years. What I didn't know is that she actually wrote songs. Now your French is getting better, Guy, though.
Yes. Now you're going to tell me she was as famous as Johnny Hallyday or something.
Probably not. It's hard to be as famous as Johnny Hallyday, who, by the way, just passed away.
Interesting song, actually. And Stacey Kent's, you know, I don't know, there's something quite risky about that song, you know, because it's got a, you know, there's sort of two songs going on in the same piece. Have a listen if you can. You probably didn't get a chance, but I like that version a lot. So listeners, pick the deluxe orchestral version rather than the bog standard one, and you'll be treated to 2 very nice extra bonus tracks. And did you know that To Say Goodbye, which is a song by Edu Lobo, the lyrics were co-written by Lani Hall?
No idea about that, no.
I didn't know that she did lyrics, but she did. She claims to have co-written these, and I don't know when she did it, whether that was probably after Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66, and before Herb Albert whisked her away. Do you know Sergio Mendes never forgave Albert for that, for breaking up Brazil 66?
Well, I can understand that. That
that
was just a fantastic combination.
But there again, you know, South America shot through. even on this album with its new original material, and the works it very well. It speaks for itself. The success of all of this.
You're listening to the voice of Guy Jones, joining us from his home in Stockholm, Sweden. This is a new episode of the Discos Memorables, or Memorable Records podcast in English. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, and this podcast will be available very soon on my not Facebook, but YouTube channel. And we're reaching now the very end of our conversation now, which, really, Guy, before we started recording, said, well, I don't have anything to say about these songs. I don't know. I'm not sure why I chose them. It's not going to be interesting. Well, it has been a blast for me. And to kind of finish the show, to wind it down, I would like to ask you, Guy, to answer this question. And I normally finish the Memorable Records podcast this way. If you had to sell the music of Stacey Kent, her style, her jazz singing, to somebody out there who may be listening but has never heard her music, and of course for copyright reasons on this podcast we won't be able to play her music either, what would you say? What is Stacey Kent like? What does she sound like? Why is she an interesting jazz singer to you?
Because I think oh goodness me, I think because she knows the songbook, and I'm not just the Great American one, but the French songbook, other parts of the Western European songbook, if indeed we have one. She certainly knows her South American music back to front, and I think that knowledge it means that she's not just singing lyrics as someone has shoved it in front of her nose. She understands where this music and these feelings are coming from, and she articulates them. In an absolute, it can't be absolutely unique, in a unique way that we couldn't possibly mistake for anybody else. And I think the sort of the multinational background, the fact she's American, she's married to a British guy, she spends vast amounts of time overseas. She's willing to experiment, but never in a way that's sort of pushing the boundaries just for the hell of it. I think most of these experiments, I'm not wild about the lyrics in the Changing Lights period, but, everyone's got to do something new. And even when she's doing something that you may not personally be that fond of, you could never mistake her for anybody else. And you could never dislike her delivery, because it's intimate, it's warm, it's smart, and there's always a new angle that Stacey Kent finds, even on the standards that we most closely associate with other artists. And sorry, I'm not expressing this very well, but for those and many other reasons, always give Stacey Kent a listen, because you'll be rewarded.
Definitely a jazz vocalist, and we need to discover, rediscover, talk about more, listen to more, because she definitely is incredibly interesting, as I'm hoping you were able to glean from our conversation here on the Memorable Records podcast. Tell us, to finish, Guy, a little information about how people may find out a little more about the releases of your reissue label, Fog Arts. Where on the internet can they find out more information about it?
Well, if anyone's interested, they can go to our website, which is fogartsmusic.com, or they can like our Facebook page. It's Fog Arts. You'll see very immediately that it's about music. I think there's an art gallery in Sonoma, California, or something called Fog Arts, but it's not that one. It's the music one. And you can make friends with me personally on Facebook, or just follow me, or if that's possible. You'll see what we're doing what I'm doing with Jan Lundgren, and also what we're doing at Fog Arts in terms of reissues. And I think we've got another couple of Lundgren issues coming up. I hope, fingers crossed, possibly 3. So that's quite exciting.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Guy. It's been a pleasure as always, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Me too. Pleasure to be invited, Anton.
Our guest today was Guy Jones, the founder of Fog Arts, the reissue label over in Stockholm, Sweden, and also the founder of the Jan Lundgren fan club. And this has been a new edition of the Discos Memorables, or Memorable Records podcast. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, and I've been talking to you from the northwest of the state of Tennessee. This podcast will be available, as always, on YouTube, and the copyright is for Anton Garcia Fernandez, recorded live in Martin, Tennessee in the year 2017. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again, or listen to you, or talk to you again very soon.